Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, April the 23rd. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes. And if you're not doing so already, please do follow the podcast. It is great to have you along. I must confess to a major omission yesterday, however. It turned out that Sam, rather discreetly, had a birthday. Belated happy 21st there. Was it a long evening, Sam?
It certainly was. I think I left work at about 11:30 last night because there's an awful lot going on. It's one of those mornings where, voters all across the UK could be forgiven if they felt like politics is simply a series of painful things inflicted on them in private rooms a long, long way away. The feeling of sort of powerlessness if you're sitting listening to us this morning at the pace of events. You could be forgiven for that. Now, we will go through what's happening in the US and with those critical meetings on the economy and the future of Ukraine in a moment. We do want to make sure we don't entirely neglect the domestic. Later in this podcast, I want to talk to you about some leaked remarks that I've obtained from Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, one-time leadership contender, of course, about his view about the threat from Reform UK. That comes on the day, actually, Anne, that our Sky YouGov poll puts Reform back in front on 25% in voting attention, which is quite considerably ahead now of the 20% that the Tories are on, with Labour in the middle. So it's quite a timely leak ahead of the local elections next week. I'm sure others will make hay with it, but it's not all foreign. The foreign impact of global politics on the UK. There is big stuff going on here at home, but we have to start with what's been going on overnight.
We do indeed. And Rachel Reeves is landing in Washington for what's turning out to be one of the most significant and eventful spring IMF World Bank meetings in many years. Reports in the Wall Street Journal overnight suggesting the US is sticking to its demand to lower agricultural standards as any part of that big, beautiful, and yet still very elusive UK trade deal. That's something that Reeves made a red line, and Keir Starmer, too, after a long debate in Cabinet, decided that they did not want to change their position on food standards as part of that trade negotiation. I think you've got another curveball for us as well, Sam.
That's right. The Wall Street Journal overnight saying that there's another one, which is basically asking Rachel Reeves to throw the car industry under the bus. Now, this is a suggestion that the Trump government wants the UK to lower our import taxes to make it cheaper to export US cars to the UK. Currently, cars going from the US to UK must pay 10%. The Trump government want the UK to lower the tariff to 2.5%. And that could mean that we have to lower our tariffs for everybody importing cars, which would be pretty devastating, I think the car industry would argue. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Keir Starmer going to a Jaguar Land Rover factory 2 weeks ago, standing with car workers. So the idea that they could happily give in to this demand feels very, very hard to imagine. But with the IMF warning that the economic outlook and the outlook for job losses is pretty bleak because of the manner in which US tariffs hit the UK, one of the hardest countries to be hit by tariffs, who knows quite what they're going to do. I think we should start, however, with the possibly even bigger news overnight. The Ukraine peace talks feel, frankly, like they're going backwards. Now, today, there had been meant to be a peace conference chaired by David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, hosted in London, but critically involving two key players from the Trump administration, the Trump envoy, Steve Witkoff, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. But both of them have pulled out. They are being replaced by General Kellogg, so there is some sort of US representation, but it's no doubt a downgrade. So that is a problem. So British, French, and German officials will be meeting the Ukrainians. But what they've got to talk about is the stuff that's going on outside of that room, right? There are reports overnight that the US wants to force Ukraine to give up Crimea, with Russia pushing the conflict to be frozen along the current line. So neither of those particularly attractive at all from President Zelensky's point of view. David Lammy putting a brave face on it, speaking to Marco Rubio by phone last night, saying he had a productive call and it was a critical moment. But it feels like this could end up in the worst possible of the various scenarios. Anne, what do you make of it?
Well, a number of things that you draw our attention to there. And I think when you mentioned General Kellogg, that's always a bit of a tell, to be honest, because I spoke with General Kellogg at the Munich Security Conference. You remember that was when J.D. Vance came and it was all fire and fury unleashed on the Europeans for being useless, as he thought, of Europe over defence. And once Kellogg is sent out by the administration as the prime representative, it really is a sign that there's not seriousness going on. The action is somewhere else. And at Munich, General Kellogg was still talking a kind of watered down multilateralism, while J.D. Vance was saying, you guys, you're on your own and we've kind of got bored with paying for you. Now, I interpret what's happened in London the same way. I happened to be at a big diplomatic breakfast yesterday, Germans and others saying, well, let's see what comes out of these talks today. So nobody was really prepared for this sudden pullback of the big names. So that's just interesting in itself. That is a bit of a snap finger mentality now, I think, towards any of the allies of Ukraine, including, unfortunately, the UK. Then to your substantive point about Crimea, well, probably a number of us, including those who might spend my honeymoon in Crimea.
Wow. Is that as romantic as it sounds?
Yalta. Yes, it was. Well, it was if you've got a husband who's interested in the aftermath of the Yalta conference. But this was a part of the world that had been in play, shall we say, for a long time as far as Russia sees it. The important thing for Ukraine is not so much that it thinks it's going to get Crimea back for our next holidays and honeymoons to be happening under Russian rather than Ukrainian rule, but they don't want to give it up formally or to have anything in that negotiation that is about the status and final status of Crimea. So putting it in there or allowing it to come back in there, as you draw attention to there, Sam, is really a red rag to the Zelensky bull in Kiev. Plenty of ways you can talk about frozen conflicts, plenty of ways you can come to de facto agreements, which in a sense Zelensky has already done by saying there was a diplomatic solution to Crimea, not a military one. But if the administration keeps pushing harder and harder, it just gets more difficult for Zelensky to sign that agreement. And that is the worry about what's been going on in London. Why is there such a pullback? And why are we getting, to be honest, General Kellogg, despite the big name and the whatever's on his shoulders, is not a big player in terms of being formative to this deal. And that will be the concern from David Lammy and others behind the scenes.
We ought to move on to what's going on with the other big set of global talks. It's probably the most important of these IMF spring conferences that we've had in many, many years. There is a crisis underway. The markets have been yo-yoing overnight. If there's a link between what we were just talking about with Ukraine and what's going on in the global economy, it's that the people at the head of the queue that's being dealt with by the White House are the strongmen. So if Russia's getting a good hearing for what it wants with the White House and President Trump, so too, it seems, is China. So over the last fortnight, Donald Trump has been unstinting and unsparing towards China, slapping 150% tariffs on goods going from China to the US. There was basically tit-for-tat trade war. But what seems to have happened overnight is that, not for the first time, the US have started tiptoeing backwards, reversing gear in their policy. Now it happened in two stages overnight. First of all, the US Treasury Secretary, who Rachel Reeves is seeing on Friday, said that the level of tariffs on China is unsustainable. Now, just saying that had a whoosh, an immediate market reaction, because it meant that at the top of the Trump administration, they were thinking afresh about that strategy. And then Trump did it himself. He went on the record. He said that he was willing to do a deal with the Chinese himself. And then he threw in, for good measure, a guarantee of the job of Jerome Powell, the head of the US central bank, the Fed. And with that, the markets kind of recovered quite fast and quite substantially from the lows that they were at yesterday, where they worried about US instability. Now, all of that is an anathema to most of the finance ministers and central bankers who will be gathered in the IMF meetings in Washington who preach to one another about stability, yet the chaos being caused all around them means it's very hard for any of them to navigate coherently what's going on. Um, Rachel Reeves is being asked to chart a course that both gives the US administration what they want when it comes to making it easier for American businesses to trade with the UK, whatever the consequences, but also at the same time having to face the EU, where we find out that she is at the forefront of trying to push for sort of slightly looser migration, this EU mobility scheme on the other side, and to make concessions to the EU. Are we on the bridge, or are we just on a very, very long tightrope and in danger of falling off, Anne?
I think the difficulty for Rachel Reeves is that she is going into a firestorm in Washington, even by the standards of the Trump administration. She said she wants to defend free trade at the same time, not offend her host, because she needs to keep working, however difficult, on that trade deal. And Trump isn't just in a very reactive mood this week. Interesting also that I think for the domestic front, and you're right to keep bringing us back to that, Sam, she wants to show that she's keen to get stuff done that sounds good for growth. And she's reflecting a new interest in the youth mobility scheme for young EU citizens to be able to come to the UK to study and to work at least on part-time or visa-limited stays. Now, this is really interesting because I was having that breakfast yesterday with very senior German diplomats and visitors, and Berlin is massively pushing this as the key to warming up Britain's relations with Berlin as a new government takes hold there. Now, Rachel Reeves's view now seems to be pretty much aligned with Germany's. This is not about immigration. This is about a sort of time-limited thing. It'll be good for growth, get young people moving about the continent, all great. But that is very sensitive, isn't it, if you're looking at migration and where immigration fits in the British debate. I think you're about to come to that from something you have there. And we are hearing that Yvette Cooper, as Politico's reporting today, is still dead set against the move. And she does link it to net migration. She said, we won't get away with saying this isn't migration just because it's nice young people.
The Home Office have been saying exactly that for weeks. That's been their position all the way since Christmas. Their point is, if you want a youth mobility scheme, make it less than a year, and then the individuals don't show up in the net migration figures. That's why you get this gap between the 4-year scheme, Australia-style scheme wanted by some, and the 11-month scheme, bespoke scheme. I think that they're more in favour of in the Home Office. It's interesting. Keir Starmer's political style is he dislikes it when two cabinet ministers come to him because they can't agree. I keep being told this. He does not like being the decision. He likes agreement being struck by people beneath him. He doesn't like problems. He likes solutions. Some prime ministers are different. They like arbitrating. That's not Keir Starmer's way. He doesn't like it when he has to pick a side, as it were. So let's see how that sort of comes out in the wash. Shall we just move a little bit to domestic politics for a moment, Anne? Because we are barely a week away from the local elections, which are the first big test since the general election. And really, the essay question in the local elections is what happens with Reform UK? You've got this new great big presence in British politics. It got a lot of votes in the election, but not a huge number of MPs elected. But it's upgraded its campaigning machine, or so it tells us. It is fielding more candidates than anybody else. And as I was saying earlier, Reform UK now gets 5 percentage points more than the Conservatives in the latest YouGov poll, and the Conservatives are worried. And really, the debate about what to do on the right of British politics, the split between, the Tories and Reform UK, for many in the Tory party, feels pretty existential. Are they going to be in a world where perpetually the right is divided and that allows Labour to come up through the middle? Now, yesterday I got hold of some leaked audio from one-time leadership contender Robert Jenrick. He was addressing some students in London last month about exactly this problem. Now, he said a couple of things that were quite noteworthy. He set out how he was worried that Reform UK were going to become a permanent or semi-permanent feature of our politics. Listen to this.
And my worry is that they become a kind of permanent or semi-permanent fixture on the British political scene. And if that is the case, and I say, I am trying to do everything I can to stop that being the case, then life becomes a lot harder for us because the right is not united.
But then, and I think this is the critical bit, he went on to say that if you're approaching a general election and it still looks like the right's divided and Labour might come up through the middle, then something must be done. Listen to this bit.
And then you head towards a general election where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited. I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the right to be united. And so one way or another, I'm determined to do that and to bring this coalition together and make sure that we meet these elections.
Now, it's important to distinguish between what Robert Jenrick is and isn't saying. He does appear to say, for now, I'm fighting against reform. But he does also, and this is the controversial bit, seem to be saying we can't be in this situation where if we're not winning that fight, we simply allow Keir Starmer to win the next election. And it's that bit, I think, that's highly controversial, that sets him apart from Kemi Badenoch, who is very clear nothing can be done, no deals can be done with Reform UK. To be fair to Robert Jenrick, he's not saying we should have a pact, we should do a deal with Reform. He's not that explicit. But you can hear from the tone of voice, you can hear from the way that he puts it, that he thinks that the current strategy feels like it only works up to a certain point. And if the choice is a second term for Keir Starmer versus doing something about that, and he's leaving it completely unspoken what that might be, then he would rather go down a different path because he doesn't want another term of a Labour government. I would venture that it's unclear what you could do unless there was some kind of arrangement with Reform, a coupon election, all sorts of, the sort of informal non-aggression pact that some believe that Labour and the Liberal Democrats had at the last election. But I would also venture that having that kind of language out there is not unhelpful for Robert Jenrick personally, should, for whatever reason, Kemi Badenoch not end up fighting the next election, there being another leadership contest in this parliament. He says he's not in favour of pacts. They say that Robert Jenrick's allies say he was talking about votes, not parties. But I think everybody will make up their own mind about exactly what they think he's referring to from those clips.
We love a bit of leaked audio, don't we, Sam? Actually, I think it is quite a juicy one that you've got hold of there for this reason. I think your analysis is spot on, that Robert Jenrick is saying, well, I'm actually talking about how we deal with voters. I'm not talking about pacts or anything formal. But what struck me listening is just this very confident use of I. I don't know about you. I am not prepared for that to happen, he says, when he says, that two parties on the right should not be disunited. I want the right to be united. I am determined to do that and to bring this coalition together. Now, anyone with just an ear for people who sound like they're also showing off their leadership muscle would hear there's someone who has a view that is a little bit different to the way, or quite a lot different to the way that Kemi Badenoch is handling it. So to me, it's as much really an interesting tonal insight that you've brought us about the way in which Robert Jenrick talks about it in front of the audiences that he wants to reach.
I've got one question for you about this, Anne. He's saying he wants to make sure that the Tories and Reform don't fight each other at the next election and let Labour do. Are there any ways of doing that are not some kind of informal arrangement? How do you get a non-aggression pact? How do you get to a situation where the two parties aren't competing just by magic?
Theoretically, you get to it, I suppose, in the old-fashioned way, don't you, of standing aside or dialing down your presence or your winnable seats strategy. But you put your finger on the pain point there. If you're the Conservatives and you're really struggling to hang on to a pretty low number of seats to start with, the idea of starting to treat with Reform, who, let's say, are not always the most reliable partners, they tend to do their own thing. That is part of their appeal as a disruptor party. Are you really going to hope that comes off? It sounds a bit like those old, the fact we always end up talking about confidence and supply arrangements, but they're actually very rare, and you usually have to be in government to get them to work when you've got things to give away, plums to give away that people want to have or parties want to have. I find it hard to see without an informal pact, which Ben Knock has ruled out. I'm not quite sure what Robert Jenrick is actually advocating for, except I think he's really saying, let's stop being so publicly critical about reform because it's not doing us any good and we look disunited. I would imagine if you're Kemi Badenoch, you're probably spitting tax saying, I have to come up with a confident conservative offer. If I don't delineate myself against reform, well, what's the point? And all of these so-called pacts or agreements are for the birds. So I think what you've shown there is really how difficult all of this is. I bet that one's not going away. I think there'll be more of those audio clips before the year is out.
I'm sure there will be. Listen, you've got to get a flight to get to Washington. I've got to get in to work too. So we will leave it there. We will see you tomorrow from Washington. Look forward to it. Have a good flight.
Don't think we're going to be short of content.